Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for joining us for the 23rd edition of the World Sustainable Summit, India's premier platform for deliberating the discourse around sustainability and climate change. My name is Anushri Harde, and I will be emceeing this session on protecting nature and ecosystems towards integrated approaches. Before we commence the function today, a brief safety announcement during the event here at the Stein Auditorium. TERI is Health, Safety and Environment Certified Organization. In case of any untoward incident like fire, evacuation is required. You are required to exit from this auditorium through the fire exit gates nearest to you without any panic. There are 7 exit gates for this auditorium, 4 in the ground floor towards your right, left, and 2 main entrances. There is 1 exit in the stage and 2 exits in the balcony, which are the entrances to the balcony. In case of fire, fire marshals will take position in the aisles and exit gates to help you evacuate. The session on protecting nature and ecosystem towards integrated approaches aims to discuss the challenges and actionable solutions involving complex issues related to nature and ecosystems. We have a fantastic line of speakers for this session on protecting nature and ecosystems towards integrated approaches. Please join me in welcoming all the distinguished speakers and moderator on the stage. I would first like to invite the moderator of the session, Ms. Jayashree Nandi. Ms. Nandi is an environment and climate correspondent at Hindustan Times. She primarily covers climate science, UN climate negotiations, climate and weather science, and environment policy. I welcome you, ma'am. First on the panel, we have Ms. Temina Lalani Sharif, Regional Director, CGIAR. I welcome you, ma'am. Next on the panel, we have Dr. Yashveer Bhatnagar, Country Representative, International Union for Conservation of Nature. I welcome you, sir. Next, we have Ms. Bahar Dutt, Environment Journalist and Conservation Biologist. I welcome you, ma'am. We also have with us Mr. Ranjit Barthakur, Founder and President, Balipara Foundation. I welcome you, sir. And finally, Mr. Rajiv Tikku, Consulting Editor, Sustainability Outlook Group. I welcome you, sir. Along with this, we have 2 panelists who are connected with us online. We have with us Professor Jeffrey D. Sachs, University Professor Director, Center for Sustainable Development in the Earth Institute, Columbia University. Along with him, we also have Dr. Eric Solheim, 6th Executive Director, United Nations Environment Program, former Norwegian Minister. I welcome all the speakers. And with this, I hand over the session to Ms. Nandi. The floor is all yours.
Hi. Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm very, very honored to have the opportunity to moderate this esteemed panel. Before we start, I would just like to give a brief introduction to the subject, and I'm going to refer to some of my notes from my phone. Please excuse me for that. Okay. So this subject is very close to my heart, and we've been reporting almost continuously on what's happening to our ecosystems and to our important species. As per the Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services by IPBES 2019, on average, natural ecosystems have declined by 47% from their initial estimated states. 3/4 of land-based environments and about 66% of marine environment have undergone considerable changes due to anthropogenic activities. We have also reported several times about the ongoing 6th mass extinction. According to IPCC AR6 released in 2022, without urgent and deep emission reductions, some species and ecosystems, especially those in the polar and already warm areas, will face temperatures beyond their historical experience in the next few decades and may be lost forever. Over 20% of species on some tropical landscapes and coastlines at 1.5 degree warming are threatened. Unique and threatened ecosystems are expected to be at high risk in the very near term, even at 1.2 degree warming. This is as per IPCC. And instances like mass tree mortality, coral reef bleaching, large declines in sea ice dependent species, we are all seeing all of these right in front of us. Lakshadweep, which has been in the news, has faced several coral bleaching events in the recent past. 2 species have already disappeared most likely due to climate change as per IPCC. This includes a lemuroid ringtail possum which disappeared after the 2005 heat waves in Australia, and the bramble K. melomies was not seen after 2009 with sea level rise and storm surge leading to the first climate-driven extinctions. The third aspect that I would want the speakers here to focus on is that we hear a lot about striking a balance between development and environment, and we are talking about such fragile ecosystems. We hear a lot about trust-based governance, simplifying processes for the industry. So I want you all speakers to touch a little bit on how can infrastructure development be planned effectively and be monitored carefully so that our ecosystems can survive. Is it possible to do that? To sum up, what type of integrated approaches are needed for protecting nature and ecosystems while ensuring that no one is left behind? Now I'll ask each one of you to have 4 to 5 minutes to make your initial comments, and we'll start with Professor Jeffrey Sachs, University Professor, Director, Center for Sustainable Development in the Earth Institute, Columbia University. Please welcome him. I think you're on mute, sir. Could you unmute?
Thank you. It's always wonderful to be at TERI. Of course, much better to be in person, but I'm grateful that I can join in this way, and I'm also honored to be together with all the panelists and with the very distinguished Eric Solheim. So it's really a pleasure. As you have said in introducing this session, the ecosystems are under profound stress everywhere in the world. Every major ecosystem, the rainforest, the alpine regions, the coastal regions, the oceans themselves, and the nature of the degradation taking place in these ecosystems is contributing to the anthropogenic climate change and other areas of destruction. The land use by itself, because of poor land use practices, is a major factor in the global warming through the release of CO2 from destruction of forests and vegetative cover, the release of methane, and many other feedback effects. So we have an integrated system in which the ecosystems are endangered and are endangering the overall Earth system processes, including climate. A couple of, I'd say 3 basic points. First, we need a different kind of comprehensive land use planning, which we don't have. There is no way the markets could begin to sort out the protection of ecosystems, and it is shocking to this day in nearly all parts of the world how the ravaging of the natural environment is largely unconstrained, sometimes illegal, but without systematic planning. Second, we need financing solutions that fit the ecosystem challenges. In general, the ecosystem services are not part of the market system per se. They will not be attended to by market forces. They are not included in market signals. So we need financial solutions that are directly applicable, for example, to protecting the forests. And here I want to thank the government of Norway and Eric Solheim for initiating various global forest funds, such as the Amazon Fund, for exactly the reason that market forces will never solve this problem, certainly not by themselves or the way that they're organized. And the third point that I want to make at a very high level is that ecosystem protection requires regional cooperation, because every major ecosystem cuts across national boundaries. And so India and Pakistan share a river basin and have done so for thousands of years, though not as two different sovereign countries necessarily. The Himalayan alpine region is shared by multiple countries. Riversheds all over the world are flowing through multiple countries. Fisheries are shared by multiple countries. We cannot solve any of the Amazon basin is 9 countries. We can't solve any of these problems without regional cooperation. And yet everywhere we look in the world, we have regional conflict rather than regional cooperation. We also cannot make the kind of zero carbon energy system that we urgently need unless neighboring countries are interconnected, because the interconnections are essential to balance intermittent renewable energy sources. So I come from a country with an Anglo-Saxon culture, which is an us versus them culture. We're always looking at who the enemy is. We're always looking at how to divide, how to form alliances of one side versus another, against China, against Russia, against this one, against that one. The mindset is absolutely the opposite of what we need to actually solve global problems. And in South Asia, we need to find a way for Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh to work together truly in a South Asia regional cooperation for energy system, for rivershed protection, for forestry protection, for Himalayas protection. All of it depends on regional cooperation. So these are my 3 overarching points. Systematic planning, which, by the way, does not exist. Second is financial models at scale that really address what are inevitably market failures. Take it from me, I've been in economics for 40 years, the markets will not solve these things. We need regulation and we need financing beyond the market forces. And the third is we need the regional scale rather than the national scale. And that's true even for the world's most populous, wonderful country, India. It needs cooperation with its neighbors, even to meet India's own needs, much less those of the broader region. So these are the 3 main points that I'd like to make, and I thank you for letting me share them and to be with the TERI again this year.
Thank you so much, Professor Sachs. That was very, very useful. Now we have Dr. Erik Solheim, who is also going to join us online. He's the 6th Executive Director, former 6th Executive Director, United Nations Environment Program, former Norwegian Minister. Dr. Solheim, welcome to this panel. You have to unmute. We can't hear you still.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now, yes, thank you.
Well, wonderful, and like Jeff, I would have loved to be with you in Delhi for this very, very important event. I've been for a number of the previous events, and I know that the atmosphere, the strength of this event is so enormous. So thank you for inviting. But let me tell you, I went to India and spent most of January in India or Bharat. I came back really, really optimistic because I saw huge positive developments, and let me share a few of them. I was invited by Adani to the Gujarat desert, where the Adani group is now building what will be the biggest solar and wind farm anywhere in the world. yes, China combined is bigger, but there's not one singular farm in China as big as what Adani is now making in the Gujarat desert. It will be 30 gigawatt of power. How much is that? Well, that is as much as the combined hydropower production of my nation, Norway. And as you know, we are very cold, we are very rich, we are consuming a lot of hydropower, and we are completely electrified by hydropower. So what Adani will do in Gujarat is absolutely enormous and so positive. Then I went to Omkareshwar in Madhya Pradesh, where India is now building the largest floating solar anywhere in the world. Not in India, in the world. It's 600 megawatts. Again, that's huge. And it's at a dam with very limited ecological consequences as far as I could ascertain. And then finally I went to Ram Mandir, which as you know is a fantastic, wonderful, beautiful temple. It will be the pride of India for generations to come, I'm absolutely sure. But look, what was the first action of Prime Minister Modi after coming back from the opening? Well, it was to launch a system for India which will bring 10 million households, or 1 crore households, with solar panels on the roofs. And it's done in a very innovative way, so that the risk is not taken by the farmer or the person who has the house. The risk is taken by the bank or by the investor in the energy. So if you combine these three, Gujarat desert, Adani, Omkareshwar solar, and a massive scheme for solar panels on the roofs, these are really India moving from 10 years ago, somewhat maybe in the backseat of environment leadership, now to being absolute front and center with China in the green revolution of the world. So this is fantastic. I can only congratulate and see Janjavad. This is superb. Then what are the issues we need to resolve? And let me point to a few issues. Because wherever you do something big in the renewable space, whether solar and wind, you need a lot of land. Gujarat desert is unique in the sense that there is nothing there. It's not a straw. So there's not even some Bedouins or some people moving around in that desert. It's completely empty. But that's very rare. Nearly everywhere, even in deserts, people are living. So when we do renewables, it needs to be a people-centered approach. And we need to do what Jeff just spoke about, a very, very detailed planning for land. Because land is the main constraint for solar and wind in the world. And let's do the land planning and in a people-centered way. And the good news is that the future will bring huge innovations in this area. For instance, to make it possible to do solar in the agriculture land. In Inner Mongolia and China, I saw how they are now doing chicken farming, tomato growing, a huge number of other agriculture activities under the solar farms. And then, of course, it's a win-win situation. The farmer gets more salary from the combination of agriculture and solar than he could or she could get in the past just from doing agriculture. So that's wonderful, but we need good planning and we need a people-centered approach to really harvest all these potential win-win situations. Second, we need to plan for the future. At some point, the windmills will have to be recycled. At some point, the solar panels will have to be recycled. We are now making an amazing amount of solar panels. Most are made in China at this stage, but the world will also keep up with China at some point. But there will be an enormous amount of solar panels. At some point, they need to be recycled. So it's adamant to start the planning for the future now. We cannot wait, but we need to set up facilities for recycling of solar panels and recycling of windmills already now. And finally, to echo what Jeff spoke about, we need to see all the areas where we can harvest the nature as a mechanism for fighting climate change and environment destruction. And a lot of that is already happening in Bharat. Let's see how it can be amplified to do more. State of Telangana has increased its tree cover by about 7% in the last decade. How did that happen? It was simply good policies and the dedication of the then chief minister to do it. and then people followed. And Hyderabad has been established as one of the greenest cities in the world, with 200 or so urban parks or urban gardens. Move on to Madhya Pradesh. Former Chief Minister Shiv Shankar Chauhan, he was planting 1 tree every day. Well, that created a small little forest by himself in the city of Bhopal. Wonderful. But of course, it inspired 80 million people in the great state of Madhya Pradesh to go tree planting. So Telangana, Madhya Pradesh, I could add Tamil Nadu, which has just launched a coastal mission for Tamil Nadu with wonderful plans for a much greener Tamil Nadu with mangroves, wetlands, etc. So this is my message to you. A lot of positive is happening in Bharat these days. We should congratulate ourselves, or you, or the Prime Minister, whoever is doing this. But we should look into the future and make sure that we get good land planning, people-centered land planning, that we start the process of recycling already now, and that we harvest all the opportunities from tree planting and in so many other areas for going green. But happy to be with you and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Solheim. I hope you'll be staying for the moderated discussion. Now we have a very special message, recorded message from Mr. Avinash Persad. He's the special envoy to the Prime Minister of Barbados. And of course, we all know him for his work on climate finance. So let's look at what he has to say on nature and ecosystems.
It's a pleasure to support the work you're doing. Are you tired of hearing empty promises about climate change? Do you feel like no one is taking responsibility for the damage already done? The world is suffering from the actions of a small minority who put their interests above the planet's health, and the poorest are bearing the brunt of the damage. But do we protest the injustice of climate change, or do we support practical steps towards real change? While some of the rich are finally waking up to the reality of climate change, they're still reluctant to pay for the damage they caused. The cost of mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage for developing countries, excluding China, is over $2.4 trillion a year, or 12 times current aid budgets. Budgets that are not rising and may even be in parts wrongly classified and double counted. Not 12%, not 120%, but 1,200%. Protesting against injustice alone won't get us there. No political party in any rich country could get elected today on a platform to double its overseas aid budget, far less increase it by 3, 4, 5, or 12 times. None. Their populations are dealing with collapsing public health and public pensions, bust social security systems, and inequality. Some of the people you're negotiating with got elected to turn plowshares into rifles, deport foreigners, and cut aid, not double it, triple it, quadruple it. And some would rather rip up international treaties than bow to demands of foreigners demanding change. In the hour of its greatest need, multilateralism is in retreat. Yet, we need to take action now. Here's the plan. First, we must focus on climate loss and damage to the most vulnerable. They need $100 billion annually. That can come from a $100 tax on every ton of carbon emitted by ships and planes, and doing it in a way that's pro-poor. Secondly, we need to invest an additional $10 billion per year, just $10 billion per year, in multilateral development banks, so they can triple their lending to developing countries at non-market interest rates. That will give us the firepower we need, $300 billion of lending, the firepower we need to build sustainable and resilient communities. And it's a fraction of what we spent last year on supporting Ukraine. Finally, we need new foreign exchange guarantee instruments that reduce the cost of attracting private capital for renewable energy projects. This is a just way to get what's needed, with the rich country taxpayers funding loss and damage, Rich country shareholders investing a little more in the development banks, they dominate and helping to block the flow of all investors into developing country renewables. But it's also achievable in a way that demanding rich country governments transfer 2.4 trillion a year to poor countries is not. Let's not just talk about the change we need or protest it. Let's be the change we need.
Thank you so much, Mr. Persad. So we'll start with the panel here. I won't go in any particular order, but I want to start with Ms. Tamina Lalani Sharif, Regional Director, CGIAR. CGIAR, as we know, has been doing a lot of work on climate adaptation, agriculture, and allied areas. Your initial comments on the subject, and then we'll have more questions.
Sure. Thank you. So thank you for having me here today. I'm really pleased to be here. So for those of you that don't know the CGIAR, we are not CIGAR, we are CGIAR. And we're the world's largest publicly funded agriculture research organization. We work in about 80 countries, and we're about 9,000 staff, and we work with about 3,000 partners in those 80 countries. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about the role of agriculture in this crisis that we're facing. And really, the ability for us to rebalance our food systems is a critical path in sort of achieving some of the climate change mitigation. But in order to do that, we really need a complete understanding of our natural resources and how they intersect with food production. So for example, you know, if we're going to introduce a particular innovation for farmers, we need to make sure that this is accessible and practical for women farmers as well as men. And by the same point, we also, if we're going to introduce new seed varieties or new technologies or incentives and that are going to increase yields for our farmers, then we need to make sure that there's water there to irrigate the soil and that there's infrastructure in place to actually be able to get the harvest to market. And you'd be amazed at how many of our farmers are facing exactly these sorts of issues. But I want to talk a little bit about the role that agriculture plays in creating the problem, actually, if you will. So agriculture, including fuel crops, is actually a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And so when we think about agriculture innovations, we have to think about them alongside energy innovations, or the other way around. When we think about energy innovations, we have to consider agriculture as part of the problem and potential solution. Modern agriculture, the way we fashion it today, is actually also one of the biggest drivers of forest and biodiversity loss. And I say that to my fellow forester beside me. And we also recognize that there's a reduction in agrobiodiversity and locally relevant crops, which we're increasingly understanding are really important for healthy diets and for nutrition. And yet, the whole notion of nature-positive production is actually recognized by the UN Food Systems Summit as one of the 5 critical pathways to sustainable food systems. And I'm quite proud to say that in our new research and innovation strategy, CGIAR has reflected that kind of work across the breadth of our research. But we're by no means the solution. This is a all-in solution problem that we need to solve. So I'll just talk really briefly about 3 areas where we're working to help to create this path forward. So we're doing a lot of work in the area of modern digital tools, and we're working with our partners on the ground, with our farmers in the field, to sort of develop Earth system observation and big data analysis, and then designing global solutions, but then also providing an evidence base for national policies for countries who want to, where they're seeing land, water, or nutrient use changes, they're able to actually make wise decisions about where they want to put where they want to allocate their resources. The second front where we're working is in innovations that are cost-effective for the management of water, of soil, of nutrients, and also biodiversity in food systems. And we're coupling that with a circular economy and agroecological approaches. And then third, we're working in the area of biodiversity in our gene banks. And this is one that I get particularly excited about because, for example, when we're developing seed varieties that demand less water or less pesticides. But we're also getting a much better understanding of indigenous food systems. So, for example, what we're finding is that many of our local traditional crops, in India, that would be millets, for example, is a great example of that. They're actually proving to be more nutritious, and they're also than rice or our other grains that we've eaten, and they're also proving to be more resilient to climate shocks. So when a farmer is facing drought or flooding, they're better able to survive that climate shock. And finally, I just want to say that I agree with the comments from our two other speakers that, this is not going to be an easy solution, but I would suggest that there are sort of two ways to scaling up the sorts of innovations that exist in the world right now. One is around farmer buy-in. And so we have to be working very closely with our farmers to actually be able to eliminate some of the agriculture trade-offs that they are going to need to make in order to introduce nature-positive agriculture innovations. And then this sort of scaling is also going to need sustained investment. So in Dubai in December at COP28, CGIAR recently launched a $4 billion campaign. And that's not just a campaign to go into our pockets, it's a campaign for all of our partners and all of those who are working in agriculture and nature-positive agriculture to begin to scale the innovations that already exist in the world so that we begin to really shift the dial on agri-food systems. I'll stop there and then I've got more to add to the conversation.
Sure. So next we go to Dr. Yashveer Bhatnagar, Country Representative, International Union for Conservation of Nature. I would like to hear from you, sir.
Thank you. It's a pleasure here to be sharing some of the thoughts that we have from the IUCN side and from my own experiences here. So IUCN, for those who might not know, is a membership-based organization with over 17,000 experts. Several of you may be commission members also. So the strength that IUCN brings is varied expertise brought together into databases, into knowledge products, tools, frameworks, everything from something which is probably the most popular is the red list of ecosystems, red list of species, to understand the risk of extinction. And that is something that, like you had mentioned, that the red list shows very clearly that over a third of species, all organisms that have been evaluated, are at risk of extinction. This is like one product, and there are several other products which can help businesses plan compliances better, countries plan protected areas, non-protected areas like the OECMs better, and several such tools are available, essentially as a result of work of commissions and other members. So, this session is about integrated approaches towards protection of nature and ecosystems. And interestingly, I have some insights based on my own work earlier. Again, it is something which IUCN also has invested. The World Commission on Protected Areas, for example, has, and another commission, CEM, they have considerable work on this aspect. Now, very quickly, what I would like to say here is two parts. One is that we require information, we require credible data, and data at a lot of levels. Yeah, and we need to work at scale. Very often we may, like studies, for example. I myself am, my master's dissertation was in a 50 square kilometer landscape, area. But the work needs to be at scale. One needs to understand how things are happening at scale. And that requires some tough data, sometimes coarse data. So one needs to understand the level of information that is required. And there is expertise globally, but I just wanted to flag here that this is what can help in integrated conservation of whether it is species, ecosystems, and so you need information on biodiversity, their status, on human society, their dependencies and their practices, local institutions, other institutions, stakeholders who are working in an area, what are their mandates, how are they converging or diverging with, say, conservation goals, and what are the threats to the area. So these are studies which, information rather, that needs to be gathered. And for anything, whether it is human-wildlife conflict management or looking at, working towards reversing degradation, it is not one thing. It is something which involves the organisms, the ecosystems, the people as a part of the ecosystem or otherwise. So I think I just wanted to flag that this is a very important facet that we need to see. And finally, any such understanding needs to flow into integrated planning and action, and planning and action needs money. And I have had the fortune of making large landscape scale management plans in the Himalaya and Central Asia. There are some insights that I can also speak about subsequently, but the key point here is that you understand the threats, you try to mitigate the threats, but a lot of these threats are generated by other stakeholders who are doing just serving their mandate, like the animal husbandry sector or the tourism sector. And for going ahead, it is really crucial to understand these institutions and ensure that we are able to, any planning includes a strong component on convergences, has a dialogue and structure through which they can actually have this collaboration and resources for whichever agency is there who can actually function and actually enable this conservation. Now, this might sound utopian, but there are examples, and it is something which I think many of us believe is the only way ahead. And the positive thing is that for flagship species programs in India, like the Project Tiger, Project Snow Leopard, Project Elephant, already these landscape-based conservation approaches are coming up. Foundations are there in tiger reserves to enable such convergences and innovative financing. So I'll maybe stop here. Thank you.
I'll have more questions for you on land use planning and also the ongoing sixth mass extinction. We go next to Bahar Dutt. She's a very well-known environment journalist and a conservation biologist. So Bahar, you can go ahead and share your initial thoughts, and then I'll come to you.
Am I audible? This doesn't seem to be on. Yeah. Thank you so much, and a big hello to my fellow panelists and to all of you. I know it's been a long day and you've shown up here, so thank you for your time and your attention. I've spent most of my time, I think 16, 17 years as a journalist, but I've also spent some time on the ground running a community livelihoods project. So I feel like I've seen life from both ends of the spectrum, which is policy level, big policy announcements, jargon, which is, when we attend press conferences as journalists, and then also on the ground, how does it translate into, the lives of individuals and how does it impact them. So I'd like to just share one image because I'm a visual storyteller and I like to pin things down to stories and people and how it impacts their lives. So this is just a story I did. Now the big buzzword in climate change and climate action these days is just transition. So I went out and I said, well, what does just transition mean? And one of the themes for today also is leave no one behind. Now if you can see in this image, these are women bus drivers. They are driving an electric bus and they are driving this intercity. And this is a company which decided that as a policy they're going to hire and train women to become bus drivers. And here's where the twist happens, which is that when they wanted to do this, they found that there are no licenses available for women to drive heavy vehicles. So they had to change policy, because you have to be of a certain weight and height to get a license to drive a heavy vehicle like a bus. Now you may say, what does all this have to do with climate change? Well, if we want to be gender sensitive, if we want that nobody is left behind in this great transition we are going to do, then how do we make sure, say for instance, a woman who may not weigh as much as a man can still drive that bus? And that's when I found that the company had to create infrastructure, for instance, just in that bus depot, which was just managed by men. How do you provide toilets for women? How do you make sure that when these women come back from intercity a bus, when they've finished their journey, how do they reach their homes safely back? So I feel that when we talk about all these big words that we're talking about in this room, we have to look at how it impacts, women like them individually. How is it going to change their lives? So that's one example. I'm now going to turn to the policy side. This was an individual example that I wanted to give, and these incredible women I met, who then had to fight the system to say, look, you need to change the licensing policy so that women like us can drive buses. And I actually went out for a drive with them and we went out and drove on the highway, and I looked at the men who were there. There were fruit vendors on the side, there were people, and the only expression I saw was, I mean, just that. I mean, visually as well, we're not used to this. So when we talk about just transition, I think these are the finer details we need to remember. These are the obstacles, which is in the system, which are not there to support, the changes that we want. The second lens I'm going to use is the policy lens. I heard Professor Jeffrey Sachs in the beginning. I heard Eric Solheim as well, some great points made there. But if I may respectfully disagree with Professor Sachs, I know he was talking about land use, and he said we're not organized enough. But actually what I find in India right now is there is an organized onslaught on our natural spaces and our natural lands, our agricultural lands, our village commons, and we're not talking about it. It's the elephant in the room we don't want to address. And I'm going to give data from the Ministry of Environment and Forests. 40 to 50,000 projects come to the ministry for clearance every year. I'm not getting into any particular party, it's agnostic. It doesn't matter which political party is at the center. 40 to 50,000 projects come for clearance. We have a 0.5% rate of rejection. These are projects coming up on our most biodiversity rich areas, our forests, our village commons, and wildlife doesn't exist just in forests or in protected areas or wildlife sanctuaries or national parks. Wildlife doesn't know boundaries. So I think that when we again talk about policy, we need to remember that there is an onslaught happening on our lands. And how do we address that? I think the second part of perhaps the conversation we have could look into solutions. We have the systems in place. We have laws in place. We have a National Green Tribunal. I'm very grateful for the systems that we have in place, but I think the compliance and the enforcement is lacking. And how do we strengthen these systems? Rather than say that it's always ease of doing business, look at making sure that these systems are able to function without any political pressure. I think those are the challenges really. And lastly, I'm just going to say that we blame everything on climate change. There's flooding, we blame it on climate change. There's extreme heat, there's extreme, or if we find that a river has burst or whatever, then we blame it on climate change. Unfortunately, what we're doing in the process is we're blaming it on the weather gods, but we're not taking responsibility for the skewed development policies that we have in place, and how do we correct those. So I think these are just some of the issues I wanted to highlight. I have another story as well to share. That's just a sneak preview, but I'll come back to that when we talk about solutions.
Yeah, sure.
So I'll stop.
So the next round will be about solutions. Before that, we'll hear Mr. Rajiv Tikku Mr. Rajiv Tikku is the consulting editor, Sustainability Outlook Group. Your brief comments on the subject, and then we'll listen to Sir, and then we'll open up for this.
Yeah, thank you, Jayashree. Thank you, Jayashree. It's wonderful being at the TERI Summit, and it's always a like a homecoming kind of a thing. We have been always here, and it's wonderful being here. Thank you, TERI, for inviting me again. I have heard esteemed panelists, Jeffrey Sachs and of course Eric Solem, and my esteemed panelists also. So they covered most of things actually. So while you would be summing up, I'll just add a couple of things on areas where we're supposed to be working on. We don't talk about ourselves because we talk about others, and it's enlightening to learn about the work, amazing work fellow panelists are doing here. So we'll come to that later probably, but I think I'll begin with a very cliched kind of an awareness issue. So what I see in last many years, decades, now lots of awareness has been created, but the challenge is still to convert that into action. Though we've seen it happening on plastic, no plastics, and some action is taking place, and I think we're gradually moving towards it. But essentially, informed awareness still needs a bit of a strengthening. Very simple areas need to be worked on probably by governments, companies, NGOs, media, of course. Those are areas like, for example, we are still concerned about tree plantation on land. Now, tree plantation on land is very important, of course, but what is equally important is marine life. So we need to probably emphasize that as much as the role of trees is in oxygen generation and carbon sequestration, a similar kind of actually equal role is of marine life. So those are the informed kind of conversations we need to have with our own people. And I'm sure today, tomorrow, those conversations will get picked up by people and then actions would follow. Similarly, we also need to emphasize upon people that a young tree and an old tree are not similar. Just replacing trees doesn't make sense immediately. It's a long-drawn kind of a life cycle assessment. So we need to work on, also try to emphasize upon people that, I'm talking to common people, I'll come to other things later on. Similarly, we also need to probably have a focused attention on checking the invasive species, which I'm sure friends will agree upon, because these are areas where probably some more work needs to be done on awareness creation. These are very basics which probably would help us in. And what is more important is probably this can only take can be only taken forward with the help of behavior change, and that will also come only when we create self-interest of communities, more ownership. Incentivizing, why not? If we're incentivizing corporate sector, tax benefits and all that, we need to probably work more on that. And of course, here policy issues come into place, and we need to look at those things in an integrated manner, as any integrated solution would be applicable to this kind of a whole ecosystem challenge we have. That's one area I would like to focus on. The second area what my friend Yesh talked about is data bit. Probably we need to get technology more into play here. We're seeing technology getting into play into corporate sector. For example, those of you who are following the environmental, social and governance discourse globally, where data technology is being used to do measurement of carbon emissions. When the regulation comes in Europe, the Indian companies are also talking about embedded carbon in their products, product-wise. So that kind of technology is available. That kind of data management, assessment, monitoring is possible. If it can happen in corporate sector where the money is there, where the business interests are there, regulation is coming in, so it should be possible to at some stage also see its utility in the ecosystem services actually. So why not? So those are areas probably they need more attention from people and policy makers. And finally, the buck stops at policymakers also. We need to have, of course, Bahar referred to a humongous number of projects coming to Environment Ministry and just a minuscule getting rejected. Probably environment and industry are already working too much in tandem actually. Probably we need to figure out also their territorial areas also. I think there's too much of partnership happening here. So those are areas where there are dangers of working together too closely also. Probably people also need to look at those areas. So these are 2 or 3 issues, areas, which I think if we're able to pick up conversations on these also, they will be quite supporting and enabling in taking over journey forward on this ecosystem journey.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tikku. That was just like a journalist, as always. Okay, so before we come to Mr. Bhattakur, what I'll do is I'll give you some food for thought so that we can, I'm already getting messages that we are, overshooting time. So I would like Mr. Yashvi to focus on, in the solutions part, on how can this mass extinction process be prevented and how can land use planning be changed. And for you, Ms. Sharif, if you can speak a little bit on what are the solutions in agriculture that one can adopt, countries can look at adopting immediately. Mr. Tikku, if you can focus on how media can cover this more effectively, just in a few sentences. And Bahar, maybe a little bit on how infrastructure, we've seen what's happening in the Himalayas, we've seen what's happening in the Eastern Himalayas. How can this be, sort of controlled in a more effective manner, both from the media side, how can we cover it effectively, but also as a biologist, what kind of policies can be put in place. And now we listen to Mr. Bhattakur. Let me introduce him. Mr. Ranjit Bhattakur, founder and president of Balipara Foundation. And he's done a lot of work on the grassroots and Eastern Himalayas. Please, sir, go ahead.
Yeah, hi there, hi. Is it okay? Yeah, thank you, Viva and TERI, for sort of reigniting this whole program that Patchy had started. And I remember speaking many years ago. And it does give me the same vibes that we are actually on the right track of what we want to do. I'll just cover my points. Actually, some of them are not repetitions, but some of them are. The first point is the world actually must understand there are three poles. One is the North Pole, South Pole, and the third pole is the Himalayas. The entire process of the Himalayas being a third pole is critical because of glaciers. These glaciers are under melt, and just by the reports that you see, by 2100, there will be 70% of this glacial melt, which means we won't be alive for sure, but the people who are alive are completely going to be challenged in terms of their land use and everything around it. So 70% of your glacial melt is going to take place if we don't address the third pole. How to address it, I do not have the solution, but this again is something that we need to actually address. Within the third pole, we and our foundation focuses on the Eastern Himalayas. We thought that we need to package and practice what the world is used to, which is marketing a brand, marketing a geography, marketing a product. So we said from Nepal to Bangladesh, from Bhutan to the sea lines, from the snow line to the sea line, and from Myanmar to the northeast of India. If you look at that whole area and you actually sort of framework it, you will see that that framework should be given a name. And that name, what we have proposed, is Him Sagar. Him being snow and Sagar being the sea. And the reason for this is nobody refers to this area as being a very critical part of the world, if not the most. People talk about Amazon, you've heard that talk, especially from America, especially from Europe and Japan. They talk Amazon and Congo. But actually they have forgotten that the biggest challenge to human beings around any system is the Himsagar area. So we propose actually that Himsagar be named in this sort of this framework. And actually there are over 400 million people also living in it. Again, Amazon and Congo don't have a sort of way in hell if we are talking about competition. But if climate refugees are a #1 priority, then this area is actually already challenged. In terms of just measurement, I think the entire process of the Himalayas and entire process of Eastern Himalayas, which is easier done because you cannot easily fathom how do you go and sort of work out what you do in the Himalayas, right on the Mount Everest or anything around it. We believe that we wanted to introduce a system based on a subject called naturenomics, called valuation of nature. Partha Dasgupta has done a lot of good work on it called the economics of biodiversity. The economics of biodiversity, unless you give it nature a value, it won't happen. The day the Prime Minister of the country stands up and says, ladies and gentlemen, the world, we are now introducing the ecological balance sheet of this country, the ecological asset value. And now my finance minister will give you the finance budgeting of the economy. Until you get economics and until you get ecology and until you get social dimensioning right, social is what people have referred to, and Bahar talked about it, is that unless you have gender, education, healthcare also managed within the system of naturenomics, it will not happen. All these three are in play, and actually many of you who know the Balipara Foundation should come and see what we do. We actually believe all the villages in India, especially in the Northeast, are already carbon negative. So why isn't that actually the money flows to carbon negative villages already? So I do not exactly understand the money flow system, but one thing is for sure, carbon negative people should, carbon negative or carbon neutral people, and nature positive therefore, should be rewarded with the pie in whenever the calculation is. I leave these big thoughts with all of us so that we can actually take it forward and do the next step.
Thank you so much. Is Dr. Solheim still online? Dr. Solheim, I would like to ask you, where is the money going to come from for such land use planning that can help protect nature and ecosystems at the level that speakers have just referred to? Your brief comments on that.
I think we always need to look for all those solutions which are both good for people, business, for jobs, and for the environment at the same time, because those are the solutions which are most likely to fly. As an example, I mean, a prime global example is the small African country of Rwanda. They now have a drastic increase in the number of gorillas, which is a huge achievement. That's one of the most endangered species and one of the most iconic species. How did that come about? Because they're protecting the gorillas in a people-centric way, so that people get jobs from it. I mean, they take, yes, a high price for any tourists who want to go and see the gorillas, but that creates a wonderful economy for all the bus drivers, people working in the hotels, teachers, nurses, whoever lives in the area, became the first line protectors of nature because they benefit from it. If let's be very honest, if intellectuals or politicians come to a local area and tell people, oh, you need to protect nature here, and we want to protect the nature over your heads, it never works. So people-centric is very essential, and that's much more essential than the money. But if you link protection of nature to tourism, to economic benefit, you can have huge progress. Someone here talked about behavioral change. One prime example of positive behavioral change is right there in India, and that's this indoor. I mean, you all know that when people speak about indoor, it's a city with a nickname, the cleanest city in India. Well, how did that happen? Visionary politicians created a system so that it was meaningful for people to be clean. They can sort the waste at home, and wet waste is even used to give biofuels to the city buses. And if you go to indoor today, you see nothing in the streets. But because you cannot change people's behavior just going around telling people, oh, you should not throw plastic in the streets, because if everyone else is doing it, it gives no meaning for me to do it, to avoid it. But if no one else is doing it, I will not do it. And then you need to create a system for people to behave well, and then you get their behavior change. And indoor is a fantastic example of how policies and people's change of heart is coming together to create a miracle of a very, very clean city in India. So if I may propose these as examples, we need behavioral change, but it cannot come through finger pointing. and we need to look into how local people can be mobilized. Again, we need to give the economic incentives. And if I may just add up, one reason why India is so important is, of course, the scale. Anything which works in India comes at scale. When Prime Minister Modi launched the scheme for rooftop solar, well, it was not a pilot program in a small village. It was 1 crore, 10 million homes with rooftop solar. And we know the effect of that will be a drastic reduction in the price of everything related to rooftop solar, which will make it available for more people in Bharat, but also will make it available for more people globally because the price comes down. And when Adani Group, maybe with Reliance and 1 or 2 others, the biggest group in India, when they do something in Gujarat Desert, again, it's at a huge, huge scale. Small company cannot do that. We need all the small companies also, but we also need Adanis of this world, those who can take change to scale. So India is so important because of scale of business, scale of politics, and of course the scale of the amount of people, which means that whenever you do something, scale is large and price becomes low, and then it can be shared by many, many more.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Solheim. In fact, scale also sometimes creates problems for us, I guess, too many people in some places. So Dr. Bhatnagar, just wanted your comments on where are we in the 6th extinction, and whether having protected areas that are like islands, cut off from the rest of forested areas which may not be protected, where does that leave our species?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, there is clear understanding. The reasons are fairly clear that other speakers have also spoken about in terms of climate and the infrastructure. There are various reasons because of which species all the way from algae to large mammals are going extinct or are at risk of extinction. There are planning approaches like I just spoke about a little bit earlier, that can be used. But clearly what is now happening is a very sound understanding in India that these small insular protected areas are not the way to go ahead. They are exclusionary. For some places it is important, but in general, I think the move is to make conservation much more inclusive in and around protected areas, although the need for inviolate spaces is understood for several species and areas. But the point here is that there is a move towards inclusivity in the planning process, and which is positive. The spatial planning to look at landscapes as connected units, not just as protected areas and connected by corridors, but also human-dominated areas, like that Mumbai has leopards and so on. So there are species, even endangered species, which are living in close proximity of humans. So there is a need. I mean, Gir lions. I mean, it was just Gir. Now it is most of Saurashtra lions are existing. So there are ways in which wildlife kind of reclaims areas which are also human-dominated now. So it is now completely necessary for us to look at scale out and look at this, but in that process be inclusive. And when I say inclusive, it's not just about participation with the local people, but also with the other sectors that I had mentioned. And there are ways in which such planning can be done through the tribal sub-plans in some areas and district plans in others. Land use planning is something which is maybe too big a scale, but I would not go for that as of now. But for regionally, I think this is something which can be done.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bhatnagar. Okay, Bahar, again, similar question. We are seeing it in Himalayas, we are seeing in other parts of the country, coastal areas, that a lot of infrastructure projects are coming up. Where is the balance? And I'll have to give you exactly 1 minute.
Okay, I'll keep it short. Yes, I mean, you've asked a complicated question and you want a simple answer. There isn't any. But very quickly, I think 50% of India's infrastructure is yet to be built. Now, we can feel overwhelmed by this number, or we can think this is an opportunity to make things right. And I think the only way to do it is, I feel we follow the thali approach in our policy planning. We want to do a little bit of solar, we want to do a little bit of renewable, we want to do a little bit of coal. Okay, that's fine. There are reasons for that, so I'm not going to get into that. But say for a city, when we plan, we'll say we'll have cars also, we'll build a small cycle stretch also, we'll build one corridor which is for buses as well. So I think we need an overhaul. And when I say overhaul, I mean that when we measure our economy, it has to be this shift from GDP to keeping biodiversity, and you spoke about nature economics. So I think we need to keep those as our central pillars. And I feel that if we keep, the creation of biodiversity assets and measuring our progress from nature protection, from these lenses, then I think we'll look at it very differently. Jayashree, if I can just end on a very positive note, I want to show that image because Eric gave the example of the communities which have managed to create a livelihood in Africa from gorillas and tourism. And we have this. This is the gibbon, which is the only ape species in India. And this is a small village in northeast India where people will come and pay just 20 rupees to come and see this gibbon. And the reason I want to give this example is it's actually in someone's backyard. It's a village where the biodiversity in their backyards is greater than the biodiversity in the government protected forests. So how do we empower these communities who are protecting this gibbon, who are protecting the biodiversity in their backyard, and get them the economics that they want? So I just want to end with this positive story that it's already happening, and how do we create greater opportunities such that these species are protected, and the farmer who welcomes this gibbon every morning in his backyard, he also gets something out of it.
That's precisely my question to Mr. Bhatthakur. We have mostly a top-down kind of approach to conservation. How do you involve people? Where can you make space for them to be very active participants in this? And I'll give you 1 minute or half a minute.
Oh, sorry. Gone to the... Hello?
Technology.
Yeah. Sorry. So I think, I don't think I have the answer, but I have possibilities. What Bahar said is really indicating that the concept of rural futures is the most important thing that we need to develop in the measurement of our biodiversity and our social diversity. If the social and the biodiversity of economics is added together, these two will be much greater than anything else. And how you do it is actually saying there is a rural renewal mission and not an urban renewal mission. The urban renewal mission should stop somewhere, and now we should talk about the rural. But if at the end of this conference TERI has many points to actually submit, one of the points is to submit is that every state chief minister and the prime minister stands up and gives the ecological asset and the ecological value of the country at that point based on just 5 things: land, energy, waste, water, air, and carbon. If they just take this, there's nothing else that you require.
Thank you. So I've already got a warning, and I have 2 minutes left, 1 minute each. To Ms. Sharif, how can we deal with toxic pesticides that not just contribute to climate change, but severe health impacts? What?
Wow, okay. So let me, in 1 minute or less, just say that with toxic pesticides, I think more and more we need to really look at the whole trajectory around nature-positive production. We've come and taken a very monocropping, very unilateral approach to farming and agriculture up till now, and we need to start to be a little bit more sophisticated and recognize the complexity of the system that our farmers are dealing with. But I would also say that we need to work with our farmers and recognize that these are our frontline entrepreneurs. And if to ask them to switch crops or to not use a pesticide is asking them to risk their livelihood for a season. And so the ability to have conversations with them at the farm level, at the KVK level even, around the trade-offs that would be required, and how do they mitigate some of those trade-offs and some of those risks. That's a key part of it. So around, there's lots of opportunities there, and there's innovations there, but we have to be willing to talk about the complexity of the system that they are addressing and they're working in every single day.
Thank you. And final comments from Mr. Tikku. How can the media cover this complex issue, climate, biodiversity, ecosystems? How can we increase?
Okay, I'll go ahead. So I think we need to look at it at two levels. One is that what should media houses do and what should individual journalists do. Media house, it is working is you have ministries and you have beats and journalists covering those beats. But the discourse is already moving ahead. From environment, it is becoming ecosystem. From agri, it is food systems now. From financial sustainability in businesses, it is sustainability in businesses now. So media needs to look ahead, media houses probably look at these areas in advance. We did it long back when Ministry of Energy became something like New Energy also. So we had that, but we still need to probably look ahead and set the agenda rather than follow what is going to happen. So this is the discourse, how it's moving. Secondly, journalists also need to understand that now the times are changed and they need to probably look at things in a more integrated manner. It doesn't work in silos anymore. If Bahar could give an example of a woman driver, link it up with just transition. So that is the kind of paradigm shift in thinking discourse that is happening globally also, in India also. So I guess we need to inform ourselves better and probably do more justice to the work we're doing. Thanks.
Thank you so much. In fact, my message to TERI, you have such an esteemed panel, these are resource people who we look forward to interviewing. And, 1 hour, 1.5 hours is just not doing justice. I'm sorry to have rushed all of you all. Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
It has been a splendid session with such great dignitaries. I would finally request all the speakers to come forward for a group photo. Thank you so much. I hope that the audience is tagging us on their social media sites. In doing so, don't forget to use hashtag ActForEarth and WSDS 2024.